Hi, thank you for joining me in the third and final part of the tutorial. Why can't I say that word? Tutorial on basic WCF. What have we done so far then? In the first part of the tutorial, we used Visual Studio to provide a service and to have a console app which acted as the client. So that's that done, and that was all hosted inside Visual Studio. And then in part 2, we took the service that we'd used in part 1, and we then hosted that inside IIS. So we've done that. We're actually going to reuse the IIS bit. And I know I said here, let's use SoapUI, but we're not going to do that. We're going to use a client that we've created in Visual Studio, but that will be a DLL. So we're going to write a client that will. That's a funny eye. As you can see, I'm experimenting with different tools for drawing here, and that's going to be a DLL, and that's going to be written in. That's going to be written in C#. So coming back to look at what we have in terms of a flow. So as we know, we've got our service running in the host of IIS, and we're going to continue to use that. And then we're going to write a client in a Visual Studio, which is going to be a C#. Which becomes a DLL, because the aim is to get rid of the presence of Visual Studio, such that we could take all of these executables and assemblies and run them on a machine that has never seen Visual Studio in its life. Here we are in our IIS manager. So if I click on the bin and we explore to there, then let's go up the level, and I want the Acme service.svc. Let's just remind ourselves what that looks like. So there we go, that's lovely. And this now, so if I just copy the name of that there, close that, we will browse to the location, and we're not allowed to see the content. This we know. If I put in Acme service there, then we get the message that we wanted, which is, so this confirms we've got the service sitting there and it's waiting for a client to make use of it. It gives us some techniques to create a client, but we're not going to do it like that. I should be clear about what I mean by like that. I mean, we're not going to run svc util and pass in the WSDL. We're going to do it through Visual Studio, but once we've built it, we no longer need Visual Studio. So I'm now going to create a new project or solution. It's going to be a console application, and I'm going to call it Acme Client. And it's a console application, as I say, so you will recognize the principle, and indeed much of the detail, as being exactly the same as what we did the first time around in part 1, where in a single solution we had both a client and a service. This time round we've just got the client. Right now the client is empty. Well, it's not quite empty, it's got the boilerplate that comes from the template. So what we are going to do is, again as we did in the first section, we're going to add in a service reference, but this time, previously we got it to discover what was available to it. This time we know that we can take, if I can just browse behind here, we can grab this reference here, go back to Visual Studio, paste that in here, click go. It tells us that it found a service. Good. In terms of a namespace, let's call it, so I called that one Acme Client, let's call it Acme Service Client. I'm just trying to rather lamely avoid name conflicts. So if I say OK to that, and then under Service Reference, you will see that we now have an Acme Service Client. Now it's generated that for us, we can start to make use of it. So if we say Acme Service Client dot hello service client, call it proxy, equals new, and then accept the suggestion, hit return, and now we can say var message equals proxy dot, and because it's kindly built those client-side classes and methods for us, it knows that there's a thing called get data, and just to really mix it up, let's use 121 rather than 101, and then we can say console write line message, and exactly as before, console console.read key, and that should be good to go. So we have no service in here, we just have the client, and we will be talking to the IIS instance. So I'm going to press play, which will get the solution to build itself, and at some point we will, so it's built the exe, and we're getting the 121, and you pretty much entered was a string you might recall from when we created the service that we stuck behind IIS. So that's all working, and that's good. Let's now shell out to, or go to the go to Explorer. So sorry, I right-clicked on program.cs. So what we really want to do now is to get the binaries into a location which proves whether we can kind of fly on our own. That is unaided by Visual Studio. So here I have set up on the left hand side a blank folder where we're going to paste in our exe and supporting files to see what the minimum is we need to talk as a client to the service. And on the right hand side we have where the place where the exes etc were built when it compiled. So I'm going to drag one at a time into the left hand window, and just to see how much we need to actually get something to work. So I'm dragging a copy of the acme client.exe into our Scratch sandbox C# folder. We are then going to open up a PowerShell window, and we'll go to sandbox C# so that we can open up. So we've got our PowerShell window opened up. I'm going to navigate to sandbox C#, and then we're going to execute acme client. We execute that, and we see that we get an exception, and it says could not find the endpoint element that references yada yada yada. Might be because no configuration file was found for your application, and that seems pretty spot on, as we just put in the exe and nothing else. So this time around then we will add in the acme client exe.config. So we're going to copy that into our sandbox area. Then we go back to our PowerShell prompt and run it again, and we immediately get back, you pretty much entered 121, which again we recognize as being the message that's returned from the IIS version of the service. So the fact that works tells us that we need the .exe, we need the .exe.config and nothing else in order to talk to the IIS service. That's all we need. So we see we've got the address, Dennis PC, hello Acme service.svc. We've got the binding, basic HTTP binding, and we've got the contract, Acme service client.I hello service. So we're pretty much done. So putting that in the context of our simple flow picture, we have the Acme client.exe and the Acme client.exe.config being the only two things that we need to talk to our IIS service, as we know. So for one last time on this 3-part course, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.